Hi, and welcome back to Fantasy Insider. In today's video, we just want to talk a little bit about some of the features of our Big Bash lineup cruncher and how the lineup cruncher that we offer for Big Bash differs in a few ways from what we've traditionally done for AFL, NBA, and so on. So first of all, if you're not a premium member, you'll see that the lineup cruncher basically shows you the average of the last 5 games for each player. You'll also know, of course, that this doesn't take account then of whether a player is expected to play or is in the squad for that night. And a lot of our kind of advanced features aren't available to free users, including some of the new stuff that we built for Big Bash. So if you are a free user, you'll want to hit the Go Premium button, and that will give you the opportunity to sign up if you're not signed up. And Big Bash is included in our regular premium package, which is $39.95 a month. Okay, so on to what you can expect as a premium member. So with Big Bash and the teams being announced basically at coin toss, batting orders not even confirmed then, we've gone with a slightly different route, focusing more on the tools than the projections. But that said, the projections still do have value, and they are still different from just sort of an average of the last 5 games. So our projections take into account a player's performance in domestic T20s around the world, so including England, India, the Caribbean, and so on. As well as international T20s where a player's played those with the performances kind of scaled appropriately. It also takes into account the expected runs to be scored in this evening's fixture, the venue the match is being played at, and, for example, where a player is in the batting order and how many overs we expect them to bowl. As always, kind of a bunch of our advanced settings are particularly useful here. So, for example, you can go through and build a short list of players. So let's say you only want to consider a bunch of these players, and you want a few of the cheaper options as well. So let's go down and include a couple of these cheaper players. So once you've built basically a short list of players that you want to consider for your team, you can go to Crunch from Shortlist, and you'll get teams that are just made of those players. Of course, you can use our kind of standard projections and just crunch normally, and that will give you sort of 10 lineups in this case that are most optimal based on the settings. And you can use the cruncher settings as usual to kind of go in and set your parameters. So for example, you may want to build 40 lineups rather than 10, and you might want 4 players different in each lineup. You might only want sort of 70% or even lower exposure to a single player. You can go in and set your stacking options, and you can also specify how multiple lineups are calculated. So whether that's based on the unique players and the max exposure that I showed you just now, or for example, whether you want, once a player's been included in your team once, you can have their score downgraded by 5% and 10% as future lineups are built. We also have this select random scenario for each lineup option, and basically what that will do is pick from one of our 10,000 simulations of the match and just use the results from that single simulation rather than the average. And again, that's kind of a way of increasing your exposure to different players. We also have our individual exposure function now that we launched for NBA, and basically you can see that's set to 70 because I set that as the kind of global max exposure here. But you can also go in and set that to a particular player. So if you only actually wanted 30% of George Bailey, you could specify that there. Okay, so now we've got the exposure settings set. You can go in and crunch lineup from all. And what you'll see here is that we now, for example, have more lineups. In this case, we have 13 lineups that were possible with settings that we've got. That's kind of the standard settings and how you might use those. Floor and ceiling, personally, I don't recommend using too much of Big Bash. Basically, every player's variance is so high that you've kind of got the mean. If anything, you can use the ceiling setting to kind of get the maximum performance from each player, but I think the floor is relatively meaningless because for most players, it's kind of 0 to 8, effectively. And again, that's kind of not perhaps one of the best settings for Big Bash. Similarly, up here, you could also go back to using the last 5 games if you so wished. But the main thing that we've built this year for Big Bash, and I'll just reset everything else on the cruncher first, is this modify teams functionality. And so basically what this allows you to do is once batting lineups are known, or before that, if you know Big Bash and you have a better idea of where a player is going to, for example, be batting in that particular evening or how many overs they're going to bowl, you can go in and modify these variables. So for example, for some reason, Daniel Christian was batting at 3 rather than 6, but you didn't think he was going to, you only thought he was going to bowl 1 over. You could go in, set those settings, click calculate, and it will say, well, okay, so Daniel Christian's now coming in higher. So that based on the sort of statistics that we've built up over the last few years, that means he's going to get more opportunity to score. A batsman coming in at 6, of course, if a team's only 3-4 down, might not bat at all, or they might only get 2 or 3 overs. So it increases his chance of scoring. And so you can see that obviously has a knock-on effect on his projection there. Similarly, let me just think of we just look at a different example. Someone who's projected high, for example, Darcy Short. Where is he? So there you go. His batting position is 1. If he was to drop down to 6, that would drop his projected score down from about 29 to 20. So those are kind of the allowances you can make there. Similarly, if, for example, our players who we don't know, who've not played yet, are projected here for a batting position of 0. So if they are actually playing and batting at 6, you can go in and specify them, and you'll get kind of what we call a kind of replacement level value. So it's kind of based on their past form at club cricket or sort of other forms of cricket, if we have that available, modified for Big Bash, or it's kind of just based on a replacement level, an average player coming in batting 6. And of course that works for bowling as well. So once you've gone through and kind of set that up as you wish, you can go apply to Cruncher. And you'll see here, for example, the example of Daniel Christian. We've pushed him up to 115.82. So when you apply to Cruncher and close out of here, you'll see that projection's been carried over into the Cruncher. And when you build new lineups, you'll see he comes in at 115.82. So for Big Bash, I think it's going to be a case of allowing for high variance, as we've talked about, for example, in the blog on the site. For me, it's not a game where you go massively multi-entering the $15 tournament unless you've got a massive bankroll. The variance is just too big. We think you'll probably have sort of a 10 to 15% edge using the Fantasy Insider projections, but because of the nature and how swingy Big Bash is, it's going to take you a long time to realise that. You could have 1 or 2 big losing years first up, and you might not have your big winning years until, let's say, year 4 or year 6. So for me, it's a case of playing it sensibly. If you want to multi-enter, probably play in the $2 tournament unless you've got a massive bankroll. And I think the $2 tournament is also a good place to have fun. If you just want to play for fun, you're sticking in 1, maybe 2 lineups a night, by all means, go nuts in the $15. The rewards are big, $2,000, I think, first prize. And as I say, I think you'll get an edge on the rest of the field by using the tools here. So Big Bash is probably the one sport where I say the tools are more important than the projections. Being able to manage exposure, being able to go in and modify the projections based on actual batting orders and your own knowledge of sort of bowling expectations, I think are hugely valuable. So with that said, good luck in Big Bash, and we'll be back on Fantasy Insider after the Christmas break. We'll update NBA and Big Bash as usual during the Christmas break, barring 2 or 3 days over sort of Christmas Eve, Boxing Day, where the NBA morning projections might not come out. And we'll also be back with a bit more behind the scenes stuff in the new year and talk a lot more about Stats Insider, which is now built and coming up very soon. With that said, have a great Christmas and enjoy Big Bash.